Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video I want to ramble on for a bit about build collection updates that happened in the recent times. Since the last one that we had of these, as these are pretty common on my channel, as we do them usually once per season, as the changes that happen to the build collection will then be covered here. Most of them based on especially videos that have come to pass. For instance, the Overdogs video kind of informing us how to set up a Pesti build for the time being. And also, for instance, my Tinkerer in-depth looks, and together with that as well, for instance, the in-depth look on the Tempest, leading to certain build changes or new builds coming in. And because of that, I generally do a video like this every season where we go over what has changed in the build collection, giving me a chance to kind of recap some of the in-depth looks effectively, and also talk about some builds and why we're setting up the way they are, and going over some of the newer additions in there. And also, as to some people that actually kind of do follow the build collection and have a lot of builds out of there, this is the video for them to kind of see if they need to update any of the builds, as I might have changed some. As definitely some did get changed. This one will also include the changes that we had with the Tinkerer, as that came in towards the end of last season, and we'll cover those changes here as well. Everything will be timestamped down below, so you can jump around to certain builds. We'll start with a whole segment about Tinkerer, as there are a bunch of builds that got touched by that, but most of them in simple ways, so we'll cover them pretty quickly. Then we'll go into some new builds and some builds that got severely changed due to new pieces or changes to some mechanics. So yeah, let's go get started. And let's do that by starting here at the build collection. This is one of the things that most people know me for, as IKEA's build collection does get bandied around quite a bit. And that's what it's for as well, and I enjoy that people are making so much use of it. First of all, if you don't see it in the grid view that I have here, we'll start there, as normally it is in a list view as this. I do recommend actually going to the grid view. It shows thumbnails for all of the builds up front. And the build collection is, in effect, a Google folder, a Google Drive folder, with a bunch of images in there, Google Drawings, and each of these contains effectively everything you need to know to copy a build, with all of the stats there, all of the choices there, what our final stats are, what talent picks we have, and even some recommendations as to, for instance, talents or other ways of setting it up. Usually they follow all the same kind of structure, making all of the build pictures kind of in the same look, and yeah, all of them in the same places, making it a little consistent and making it easy to kind of follow, hopefully. They aren't still guides for newer players because, yeah, they don't explain much about what the build does or what it can do or how it plays. I leave that up to, doing some build showcases and things like that to kind of showcase them. There's also a recommended builds list and a recommended weapons and talents list, both in here as to help out with some of the picks, because not everything from the build collection is per se recommended, as there are some weirder stuff in here, some testing builds, less and less so as we move forward, as we have much more effective builds. So we have less and less testing builds actually at this point. But this recommended list as well kind of does give a little bit of an intro as to what the builds are for, giving, for instance, sniper builds being great for 5 directives and such, or the tech tanks being my solo picks. And in here, then, yeah, we have all of the builds laid out, and this is basically the way that I have them in the game as well. As actually the numbering of this, as some may know already, but a lot don't, is actually the way that it's laid out. It's going from 1.01 all the way to 1.16, and then it starts with 2.01, goes to 2.16. And for those that know, that once you reach the cap of 16 loadout slots, if you have that many, yeah, that's the cap. So these are the characters. So this is literally the character 1 that I have all their loadout slots in the game represented in here. And it is basically a 1-to-1. Now, sometimes in the game, I have it a little bit laid out a little bit differently, maybe saved a little bit differently, maybe. But generally, the builds do overlap. So I can, whenever I load it up in the game, I can basically just point people to the number here, effectively. The one thing that might be confusing to some is that it goes to 5.01 to 5.16, and that is, of course, we have 4 character slots, so how do I have 5? Well, that is the second account. And actually, on 5.01 to 5.16, I basically have a bunch of repeats, effectively, from a lot of the builds that I enjoy from the main account that I have. And that's also how my second account is kind of set up. It is my fun account. And the builds that I like running quite a bit do make it up there, but usually with a little bit of variation. I do have a set rule for myself in the build collection. No 2 builds should be exact copies. There is one exception, actually. I do have a Heartbreaker tech tank. There's really only one way to set it up, although I show one with a Lexington, one with a Kingbreaker. That's me going like, good enough for not breaking the rule. But usually I try to at least show them a little bit differently, even though that's, for instance, in some cases, it's actually saved quite similarly. Then we have a bunch of S builds. These are builds that are in the stash. Some of these are for as joke builds. For instance, some of the purple builds show up here. Then we also have the X builds. X builds are exactly that. They're builds that are now my X's. All my X's live at the bottom of the build collection. And these are builds that I used to have and for some reason don't anymore. Usually they have either become, they've been surpassed by something else, or I just don't enjoy them anymore, but I still want to keep the build picture. And for those, we have it here. Some of these are, linked to some old build showcases and such, so I do want to keep them around. And then we have also some silliness at the very end with some Lexi belling, for instance. But yeah, the structure of the build collection is always this. I'll try to kind of match it with the in-game. Although, for instance, for some builds in the game, I have it a little bit differently, where, for instance, if we go here, some builds are saved, for instance, with this negotiator, very obviously with 5 pieces, and I would never run it in this way. But this way I can, in the way that it is set up in the build collection, it is with a coyote. But when I save it in this way, I can also run it with a memento, for instance. So small changes like that. But yeah, generally all of the builds that I have in the collection, for instance, well, here with the tipping scales as well, just so we can put in a contractors or maybe a coyote or a tinkerer or memento or whatever we want to stick in here. So generally I do save my builds like this, and then giving myself a lot of options. But then on the build collection, we show generally what I think is the best option for general use. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's go get started with some of the changes that happened, starting with a bunch of tinkerers. And indeed, we're going to cover a bunch of tinkerer builds that came in. Although in the end, as we kind of discussed with the in-depth look into the tinkerers, we can just slot them in and just have them do their job in place of, for instance, a coyote or some of the other exotics. Honestly, what we're gaining there is just weapon talent picks, but I've enjoyed quite a lot running different variants with the tinkerer, especially damage and damage talent, either killer or measured or ranger or even streamline. And then in my case, I liked in the past already fast dance quite a lot. Having that come back has been actually one of my go-tos there. But I'll also lift the veil a little bit, and that is that actually most of my characters now have their strikers kind of saved like this. Now, in the build collection, I have it kind of set up with the Tinkerer having an LMG variant, having an SMG variant, and having an AR variant. Changing the weapon out, it is kind of actually it isn't a lot, because yeah, usually I would want to have changed that more than that to make it a different build, because just changing the weapon out, it's effectively the same build. But because of the different crit chances of LMGs, especially because I do go with the crit chance third stat usually, because of that, we do lay out the build a little bit differently or go with different mods here. But actually, as you may see, I don't have it saved with the Tinker. I have it saved with a Groupo mask, and this way as well, I can actually, as I talked in that video, I actually even don't have it set up in the exact way that is that build picture, because we have a crit chance mod here. And I either stick in a Coyote or a Tinkerer as needed, or even go with Overdogs, for instance. And I also have a Striker mask, as generally actually for all of my characters, I have it like this. I have all 6 Striker pieces on them. We wouldn't, of course, run it this way, but this gives me the option to, if I want to, bring in, for instance, yeah, let's say Overdogs and Turmoil or something, or for instance, in this case, I can go with the Overdog and then stick in, although a Cheska mask would be better, but I can grab one if I need to. This way, I can go with very different variations as the need arises. So I can go either obliterate or chest, because honestly, I don't subscribe to the idea that one is better than the other. Not in general, because it depends. It depends on the content that you're doing, but not even just that, but also who you're doing it with. If my teammates are a lot weaker, I'm very likely to go with, for instance, a chest striker in a legendary. But when I'm doing it actually with very competent players and we're just doing DUA, for instance, even there I will struggle to actually get the chest striker going because my teammates are too good and we're all basically too good. And then it's better just to be on an obliterate striker. So generally, actually, I'm kind of cheating in the background. All of my strikers are kind of available to be either Tinkerers or Coyotes, and then also in chest striker variant, or even going with, Overdogs is an option, Bloody is an option, Centurion is a really good option. And we kind of also covered all of those in a video, and I'll link actually to that video here as well as kind of the overall thing about this section, which was the Tinkerer on Striker video here. And in that video as well, there's a linked spreadsheet with kind of all of the calculations and such, and we go over all of the calculations there, of course. But from that, we effectively brought in a few strikers. Now, I used to have it the way that I had a chest striker and then an obliterate striker separately per AR. So character 1 had, for instance, a chest striker AR, and then character 2 had an obliterate striker AR. All of these are now set up as obliterates, and then actually in the corner, I just show a chest and then a Cheska glove. In this case, just basically I swap out those two pieces around effectively. And you will have the same stats, but then going from an obliterate to a chest striker. That's the way to kind of go about it. But then, yeah, we have here 1.02, we have 3.02 and 4.02, 2.02, because yeah, actually generally on my O2s are my strikers effectively. So on each of my characters on the O2 slot, I have a striker. So the second loadout slot. The one from character 2 was already a Coyote one. We've kept that as a Coyote one because it's still worthwhile to sometimes have a Coyote version of it. Not that it's actually that much different than the Tinker variants. But here especially to kind of lay out how we set them up and also what mods we would go on the weapons to make them line up as best we can for instance, the Tinkerer here. And also, yeah, I've added in nowadays a bunch of the talents as we see here. So this whole section here, we have a bunch of talent picks for Tinkerer. As overall, this is what I would always recommend, just either going 2 of these, basically. Killer, Measured, Streamline, Ranger, Frenzy here with LMGs, Fast Stance, Preservation, and Future Perfect. Pick 2, basically. I like going with the damage talent, usually Killer or Measured with Fast Stance, especially. That's one of my go-tos nowadays. If you're okay with Streamline, Streamline plus Killer, for instance, is really potent. And that was also the conclusions that we had with that video. And we've integrated all of those here, making a few new strikers appear. Even though they're kind of, very much similar to each other, all 3 of these, just the difference in weapon type is enough there to kind of, make it worthwhile enough to kind of show them off here. And Tinkerer, of course, did touch a lot of builds, and it can touch a lot of builds. In the end, I put it in several places, and Strikers was one, but let's go see the other, which is OD. Let's go to some ongoing directives, which were some of the big winners when it came to Tinkerer, because especially they have access to good, or even the greatest of some of the talents, in already having Sadist as one of the big ones, and they can effectively make use of it by just basically guaranteeing everything is going to bleed. And then we can pair that, of course, with other things. So in this case, 3.01 and 5.13, which are both actually just very similar on ongoing directive. One of them is on second account, where I do want to have an OD, and my workaround of let's make it just enough different so the teacher doesn't spot it's the same homework is going from Vigilance to Wicked. That's basically the difference between those two. As for the rest, also, they have different talents kind of showing up here as well. It's actually showing up the crit damages on this Wicked one is kind of set up, or well, the crit chance, actually, I should say, is set up for Wicked, where we're putting it at 44.5 crit chance, which is pretty low, but it's leaving that gap for that Vindictive to come in and to really fill it up on this 5.13. The other one is set up with Sadist and Frenzy, a combo that I like quite a lot. Here as well, just giving some of the hints as to what talents to pick in the corner. As with the Tinkerer, yeah, Sadist is kind of our first pick for OD, but then we can pair that, for instance, yeah, Frenzy as we saw there, we saw Vindictive already as well. Pressure Point is also a really good pick, but so is Killer still, even here. Because it is more than Pressure Point when it is active, but Pressure Point can be a little bit more consistent, so it kind of depends on what you're doing. Solo, I would go with Killer, I would think. Then as well, for the backpack talent, actually, on both of these, we could go either Vigilance, Wicked, or Unstoppable Force. All three are actually pretty good picks. I feel nowadays as well, just going with the Tinkerer for OD. OD is the big winner there. And we kind of discussed that as well. I'll link to this video as well, as after we looked at the Tinkerer on Strikers, we went and looked at Tinkerer on Miscellaneous here. But this included OD and several other kind of red build styles, and even some basically Turtle hybrids and such. So in this, we kind of went through and kind of came to the conclusions as to, yeah, the Tinkerer being really worth it for OD. And that has made it a mainstay for OD for me. Basically, most of my OD builds, and that's also including this shotgun one, which is 1.12, all got the Tinkerer. The only one that didn't as an OD build was the Tech Tank, because while Tinkerer competes with on red builds or on, for instance, here with 2 blue cores, kind of these kind of builds, it doesn't compete against the Memento, and especially on that Tech Tank OD, which is one of the lesser OD or Tech Tanks and ODs, I would say. But it can be useful because it can be deal with 5 directives, for instance. On that one, the Memento, the one place that I feel basically a Tinkerer doesn't compete against is solo, and then with the Memento. That has its own niche, and that has its own place. So that one stayed the same. Every other OD effectively went with the Tinkerer because Tinkerer are just too good. Here with shotguns as well, we can go with Sadist and then Brazen, which is a really good combo. And honestly, one of the conclusions as well from that video was that for Hunter's Fury, for going shotguns with Hunter's Fury, honestly, actually, it's maybe better just to go with OD. The only downside is you don't deal well with mechanicals, so if you're fighting Black Tusk a lot or want to fight Black Tusk a lot, this wouldn't be the way to go because their Warhands and such don't bleed, where, for instance, with Hunter's Fury, you would still do well. And one of the downsides for Hunter's Fury especially was the conclusion of that video as well was if you go Tinkerer, you have to take the chest or the backpack. In the case of the OD, the chest is already really good, so we want that. With Hunter's Fury, you're giving up too much by either going with the Hunter's Fury chest or the backpack, which you would have to do to get that Tinkerer in there. And because of that, actually, turns out that for shotguns, Tinkerer, yeah, with OD is kind of the way to go. One other one, and this kind of as a stand-in for a lot of the other red builds, because honestly, you could, in Umbra, you could stick it basically in any red style build where we're preferably already not using, or we can use one of the chest or the backpack piece, because we would need that, or even both, if both are viable. In the case of Negotiator, for instance, the backpack is a good piece, the chest is a bad piece. So we're avoiding the chest, but that's enough for us. We can take the backpack, we can take Tinkerer, and have a Negotiator version here. Kind of as a stand-in as well. For Umbra, for instance, where you can take the backpack, or you don't take the backpack, you take the chest, you take a Vigilance backpack, and then you can then also still stick Tinkerer in there. And same for a lot of other styles of builds. But all red builds kind of can, if they want to go with the Tinkerer, but generally you would want one of the gear set pieces to be good on the chest or the backpack. And for instance, Negotiator has that, Umbra has that, and of course, yeah, Strikers, for instance, especially has that. But yeah, from that video, we kind of had some conclusions here for instance, as well, Negotiator. We're just picking, again, out of the general set of talents, going either measured with Killer or Streamline or Ranger or Fast Dance or Preservation works out pretty well. And yeah, Tinkerer did touch a lot of builds. In the end, though, I didn't per se put it on every build. Here, for instance, we had 2 Negotiators, so I kept one with Coyote, one with Tinkerer. On things like the Umbra, for instance, I put it in the corner as an option, and definitely a good option for Umbra as well, but yeah, just to kind of also save on some time, because otherwise we would have to redo the damage numbers and such, as we have done here. But yeah, especially this video going into the Tinkerer Miscellaneous will kind of lay out all of the choices here made. But overall, ODs definitely are the big winners with Tinkerer, and honestly, I would just run them just with the Tinkerer from now on. And next up, let's go to 1.11, which is Tipping Skills TS Ugly LMG. In this one, we went over an whole in-depth look onto the tipping skills, and I've quite enjoyed this new gear set that we got this season. It is actually potent enough to be used, especially for just heroic content, and even legendary, you can make it work. It has enough damage to get by. Some of the choices that we decided to make actually took a little bit of a while, and also the in-depth look to kind of get to, which was, for instance, yeah, the third stat, actually, crit chance. This is the one place where it doesn't make sense, and actually other things can beat it. So for instance, here, my go-to has become rate of fire on the LMGs for it. You can also, for instance, go health damage, and then here as well, as long as we're not, for instance, using Tinkerer, which we could definitely use Tinkerer here as well. But if we're just setting it up, for instance, in this case, we could actually pull out this LMG when we have something with health to deal with. And for instance, Warhounds or Heavies or such, and then move back to the other LMG once we have dealt with them and such. So we can kind of min-max that way. But overall, especially, yeah, that crit chance third stat, realizing that that didn't make that much sense here. Mostly because tipping skills pushes up crit damage so high, much higher than we have seen ever before. It's also why, for instance, the gap in between the crit shot and the non-crit is actually humongous, much bigger as well than even the backfire ever used to get. And this build picture, the way I went with it in the end was a Cheska chest and the contractors here. For a time, I discussed as well thinking about going with a Petrov chest, even, and then, for instance, a Petrov chest and then not the contractors with it. But if we're going, for instance, yeah, Coyote, although Coyote didn't make too much sense, but for instance, Tinkerer, going Cheska or Petrov chest. Turns out in the end, the Cheska can be made to work, especially if it lines up a little bit better with our crit chances. But effectively, we're just tossing a lot of optional exotics here in the corner that we can go with. And I would say actually any of these is a good fit for it instead of that contractors. Generally, I do avoid the chest unless you're doing very specific things. The chest is just not going to work out because you need to be firing for 5 seconds longer. Without the chest, without the tipping skills chest, you just need to fire for 10 seconds to get to max stacks. With it, you need to fire for 15 seconds, and that 15 seconds is a lot. Also, in the game, actually, just to show that here again, I'm actually saving this with 5 pieces here, for instance. Now, of course, we wouldn't run it like this unless I forget to actually swap in a piece. But it is, of course, saved this way so that if I load the build, I can either, for instance, go in here and stick in, well, that contractors that we have on the build picture, or an Overdogs, or I can keep this glove here and I can go with a Coyote or a Tinkerer. I can even stick in a Centurion in here, and this way I can play around with how the build is set up. So I can basically have one loadout saved, but then it can form to be a lot of different variations on the same build. And that is actually, yeah, a recommendation. I even have a video kind of going into this, and also a short even to kind of going into this. And it's actually a recommended thing to do and kind of think about kind of saving some of the builds in that way so that you can experiment with different variations very easily. Because for me, usually it depends kind of what I'm doing, where we can, how we kind of set this up. But yeah, the final version of it became this. That's also kind of based as well on the Tinkerer in-depth look and the calculations of it here. I'll link to the calculation sheet where we kind of went over some of the talent picks and such that we could go here. Notably of this was also that, like, for instance, Killer is basically dead on here. It has killed itself. It has too much crit damage, and already the gear set has already too much crit damage, for instance, for Strained or Killer to kind of come in here and do much. So Measured and Streamline and such become kind of the picks, but then Streamline kind of comes with its own downsides, of course. And then, of course, also looking at some of the other exotics that we could go with and such. In the end, though, I feel just the general use one would be this. Just the contractor is very simple. We take measured with it as the main, and then we can also use 2 weapons effectively, and then one going, in this case, with health damage. But overall, there is a lot of ways of setting this up, and we'll also cover that. Likely towards the end of the season, I'll make a build showcase on tipping scales, and we'll go much more in-depth with it, and also look at, for instance, putting in some Tinkerer and kind of what choices we could make there. Although with Tinkerer, and that's also why these 2 weapons are here, I generally go with measured, and because we have so few options that kind of work out, because it's either effectively Ranger, if we're going for damage end of things, either Ranger or Streamline. I like Smart Cover a lot with this build. Situationally, we can get a lot of extra damage for a little bit of time, together with really good handling to go with it. So I like having the Smart Cover. That has become my go-to here, a Revive Hive and a Smart Cover. The precision one, of course. And if I'm going with Tinkerer, I'm generally then going with Measured and Ranger, as Ranger can be pretty good. Also, LMGs have a little bit more optimal range, so we can actually set up a little bit further and kind of make that work. Overall, though, this edition, definitely an edition that will be here for a while. It is another red build, and overall, as I kind of showed, each of my characters already has a striker. This isn't per se going to replace that for any of my characters, but I like the playstyle differences that this has, and it's well worth messing around with. So yeah, let's move on to the next one, and let's go to 1.03 here. And this is the Pestilence setup. Now, this used to be the famous Lengmo setup, and the build picture has now been changed to be here with the Sacrifice, and then the Lengmo pieces shifted around because we can have the Overdogs in here now. As it turns out that the Overdogs does apply to the Pesti ticks, and because of that, it is one of the most potent pieces to put in here. Now, of course, a lot of other exotics would apply to the Pesti ticks as well, just being weapon damage or total weapon damage, which would apply there as well. Overdogs being a separate multiplier is already a lot bigger than, for instance, Bloody Knuckles, which would be additive to the unstoppable force that we have here. Because Bloody Knuckles, even though it says weapon damage, it is total weapon damage. Same was true for instance, Sawyer's. Centurion would be weapon damage, which would be additive to that pool. Here, the Overdogs is a separate multiplier, so it's already bigger, but also it works out in a mechanical sense really well with the game. Because what we get with the Overdogs is that, especially the very last enemy left alive, and that's usually the one that we couldn't already kill, that's why they're the last enemy, so they were likely hiding in the corner in the back or something. And when the Pesti tick reaches them, if they're the last enemy, that Overdogs will be active and they will die a lot faster, as this Pesti tick has gone up quite a bit. As with the Lengmo variant, for instance, the Coyote variant, it was in the high 1.5s. With Sawyer's variants and Bloody Knuckle variants, you can get into the 1.7s, this 1.9 that this Overdogs has. Although here with a fully graded Pestilence, this is kind of as high as it can go. This is a new height for it. We will have to see if this actually will maintain like this. That's also why I've put the old Lengmo variant as an X build. Still, I've kept it around just in case, because the Overdogs is also applying to some skills. That definitely isn't intended. It is specifically talking about amplifies weapon damage. And we've seen in the past when they fix that, which we've seen on Ongoing Directive, the other OD. It's funny that 2 ODs have worked in this way through time. This OD as well, this Overdogs, might get fixed for skills, and by extension, it might actually then also not apply to the Pestilence anymore, because I don't feel it should apply to the Pestilence. Amplifies weapons damage usually does not apply to the Pesti tick. We see that as well, for instance, nowadays in OD, but also similar worded items do not increase the Pesti tick by that. But for the time being, this works this way. Overdogs turns out then to be, we can put that here. We do take out the contractors that way for a little bit, and some people might be noticing this here as going, wait, didn't you recommend a Petrov version with a glass? Yes, I did. In the Overdogs video, that was actually the recommended one there. That was also the build picture shown there. As you can see, the build picture got changed, and that's due to one of my mistakes. I made boo-boo and accidentally forgot one stat in there. We'll look at that in a second. This way as well, we only need the backbone, which is a somewhat harder piece to get. 2 Lengmo pieces here on the mask and the holster slot. We kind of need them to be that. We'd still take the Fox's Prayer overall, one of the bigger bonuses, especially as well as the detox does apply to the Pesti tick. And then we take a sacrifice here, making it a lot easier. We don't need that Lengmo chest anymore. And even this way, we don't need that Petrov chest as well, which can be a harder piece to get. Most people will have a sacrifice laying around. Let's actually go look at my mistake, and I'll point and laugh. As one thing that I had forgotten in that video, this is from the spreadsheet from the Overdogs video. I had very simply forgotten that this headshot number, of course, gets a brand bonus from Providence. With that in place, so I had it basically on 85, the base amount for a character with the watch points, and then an LMG, that's 85. Of course, Providence adds another 13. Even with 20% headshot rate, the difference is now there. So in that other video, we kind of discussed it as there's basically no difference in the DPS and not much in the tick as well. The tick is a little bit higher for the glass, but here now also we see that the damage-wise, it is about 2% more. And overall, I would say if we're kind of leaning into it, we should lean into it all the way. That 2% does add up. The thing is also, this is at 20% headshot rate, a pretty low headshot rate. If we just take this to, for instance, 100%, now we are more than 7% ahead, as we see here, and 18% for going with what this was with the Petrov glass chest, and here the glass is much higher. Now, of course, we don't generally hit 100% headshot rate, but sometimes we do have the opportunity to hit some heads, and even at 0% headshot rate, they are kind of head-to-head, with the Petrov still a tiny bit behind. So overall, because of that, and yeah, because of that mistake that I made, yeah, it turns out that the glass chest is kind of the way to go, and that's also why I've changed the build picture. And thanks as well to the people that pointed at that, as several people did. And yeah, always keep me honest. If you see a mistake, feel free to don't be afraid to just, come ask. As long as you don't come in like breaking the door in and going like, "Hey, you dumbass, you fucked up." As long as you kind of bring it in a calm way, I'll admit my mistakes. And this one definitely, yeah, a mistake, and one that I didn't catch and went into the full video. But we'll correct that here and eat our crow when it's young and tender. Because yeah, let's not leave that crow lying on the ground for too long. That we have to eat it when it is, yeah, the messiest shit ever. But yeah, a little mistake, but in the end, we did get the results that we needed them to be, which is that, yeah, this setup is then the way to go, at least for the time being. As long as the Overdog applies, we will go with the sacrifice chest, making also for a much easier build to get together, as, yeah, that Lengmo chest not per se needed anymore. And next, let's go to the Tempest builds, because of course the Tempest has now become available through the summit, even though even at the very start of the season it was available for a day, unintentionally, now intentionally through the summit. And because of that, yeah, we have access to it, and because of that, I'm adding it into the collection now. Now, we already had a high-end pistol build. It, of course, will go into there and become the new piece in there, as we discussed in the Tempest in-depth look. It is well worth as a weapon to use, even with its talent not being that effective. We don't care about that talent. Its base stats are more than well worth using. And this can make for a pretty good build, for instance, to deal with 5 directives without going Headhunter or without going ongoing directive. And that has been my use of it already as well. In the summit, you running this, for instance, with 8 directive nowadays, has been quite enjoyable. And I used to run it in a similar layout, but we changed the layout in the end as well, as since the last time that we saw it in the Tempest video, it actually changed in layout. We'll discuss that in a minute. But I used to run it with Card 45 with Killer, and that's also the reason the layout got changed. We no longer have Killer, so... But this is then the high-end variant. We also added in actually a Striker variant in the end, and this one is now on 514. This is on second account. Effectively, this is a Striker tech tag, but then with a DNH chest with a crit chance mod. Literally, if we change it to a Cheska chest with a crit damage mod, and then use the other weapons, the CTAR that I have there and the ACS, then, and with the Crusader shield, that would be a striker tech tank. Changing it out with this DNH and a crit chance mod on it, we're changing it to this pistol, and then, yeah, just taking a bulwark instead. This way as well, making for a really easy way for me to have, kind of two builds in one, as I can just take the Cheska chest from a different build and make this a striker tech tank for second again. Let's first look at this high-end one as well. We looked at it in a different form in the Tempest video, which was that Imminence Armaments, that knee pad that we have there. That used to actually be the mask slot. The DNH used to be on the chest slot. There didn't used to be a chest in there, and it was a Fox's Prayer. Now, actually, after the Tempest video, I kind of had the realization that, hey, actually, that Fox's Prayer, I remember it making sense because of Killer. And that was because, of course, when Killer comes in, our crit damage goes up quite much higher. So things like, for instance, Grupo or Cheska lost a little bit of effectiveness versus the Fox's Prayer. But it turns out, and I've added this in, and I'll link to the spreadsheet as well, as a final calculator here, one extra one after the fact in the Tempest videos, multi-calculators. As if we go here, we're looking at the Fox as we had it in that older build picture at 55 crit chance, then Grupos, and then also this Punch Drunk Cheska. And in the end, I went with the Punch Drunk Cheska. The thing is that without Killer now there, and this is actually a very important point, and one that I actually should have realized as well, we have changed talents. We should actually relook at the build. Because here, of course, when the Fox's Prayer is 100%, the Grupo is actually winning with the Tempest now. In the past, of course, it will be losing by several percent, because once that Killer came in, it is going to diminish the crit chance, crit damage, and also by extension actually headshot a little bit, the effectiveness of those. So the Grupo, Cheska, and such, they would all lose when we were active with the Killer. And of course, most of the time we would try to be active with the Killer. Here with the Tempest, though, we no longer have that, so we should relook at it. Turns out that, the Grupo actually, and why we don't have Cheska here, Cheska just didn't line up well. There was no good way, especially with the weapon, where we don't have the ability to flip any crit chances or such. Numbers-wise, it just didn't work out. So here we can land this Grupo basically on 55 or on 60. Cheska could basically only land on 62 effectively, which was kind of annoying. And because of that, it didn't work out for the Cheska. But then I also looked at Punch Drunk. Now, Punch Drunk, that 20% headshot, actually in that other variant, we generally needed to be above 40% headshot rate with when Killer was active for it to be worthwhile. Here, though, because we're also gaining a Cheska piece in there, gaining us crit chance, so we no longer actually lose that, because that headshot, of course, comes at the cost. That headshot stat on the second, as the perfect stat, comes at the cost of one of the minor stats of it. It doesn't just have, that on top. With the Cheska there, this actually lines up really well, where we land on a 57-141, and we can have that Punch Drunk in there. Now, actually, at the 20% headshot rate that we have it here, the Grupo is overall still going to win, but it is a minor win. And the reason I, in the end, went with the Punch Drunk is that we can just have a Cheska chest, making it much easier to get, because most of us will have a Cheska chest lying around. And also, if we up the headshot rate, and we should try to hit, closer to 40%, maybe headshot rate, as this headshot rate basically goes up, as we have it there, the Punch Drunk will perform better, and the Grupo will perform worse because of the additive nature of that headshot. But then here, of course, even though it is an additive nature, our rate is going up by a lot. So generally, I would lean towards that Punch Drunk. And overall, actually, all three of them are pretty close to each other. You could still make a case for this Fox's Prayer variant. And the differences aren't humongous. It's a percent here and there. But in the end, I did change the build picture, and that was mostly because we now have a much easier layout for people to get, where we have that Cheska chest, a piece that a lot of people will already have lying around. A Punch Drunk is not hard to get, and then we put some Imminence Armaments pieces in the other slots. Now, getting those imminent armaments pieces, they come with red cores, of course. We need to recore them to blue, so we need crit chance, crit damage on them, making it a little bit harder to get this setup going. But then also, let's go to the striker one, and as we discussed in that Tempest video and with those Tempest calculations we had a second ago, the striker one is actually kind of the way to go, as well. That high end actually starts a little bit higher on damage, and then but a lot lower, ends a lot lower on the damage. The striker basically starts lower, but also goes much, much higher. Both have their place, I feel, especially for activities. I could see myself leaning more towards the high end, but sometimes actually it's kind of hard to get enough stacks out of this. But generally, if you're above 50 stacks, this version will be beating the high end as it was. And yeah, that is easy enough to get in a lot of content. Because of that, and also because the Tempest actually has a rate of fire for striker, that is what makes this possible. So this striker variant is now then kind of the recommended for the Tempest by quite a lot. I've been enjoying it a lot here with Obliterate, with both of them as well. We can go Intimidate or Obliterate, and I'll actually show in the game. So while you have the high-end one here, actually it is saved with an Intimidate Cheska chest, and the reason for that is that I have an Obliterate Cheska chest from other builds, so I can just slot this in if I want Obliterate, or I can slot the other one in if I want Intimidate. As we looked into with the Tempest video as well, was that the Intimidate can do a lot more damage, but then of course we're limited to that 10-meter range. We also need to get a kill in first to get that memento pickup, just so we can have the bonuses active. Because of that, Intimidate, well, I like it for a lot, for instance, in Summit. In Summit, I like it quite a lot, where it's kind of, very small rooms, and enemies aren't that far usually. The Obliterate overall is just more consistent, and because of that, a much more viable pick here. And with the Tempest, we have enough rate of fire that we can actually make that Obliterate happen fast enough. That is mostly the thing here as well. The Tempest having enough rate of fire to make Strikers work. And then here as well, Strikers is even increasing its rate of fire a little bit more, making that Obliterate a little bit more consistent. And overall, this has been one of my enjoyable picks for the time being, and especially for running 5 directives, because here with this, for this season, that is, for instance, as well with cool skills, we can run this quite easily. Tech tanks don't care about cool skills. You don't need to have any charges on the backpack or on the artificer while it is on your back to have it healing your shield. Even with 0 charges, it still heals the shield. So this way as well, we can actually set it up with, depending on how you like it here. I've kept the tech tank 6 blue cores basically or 6 cores for the shield, with here having 3 blue cores on the striker pieces. But you could actually drop a few if you prefer that. I like it actually in this way. It still has more than enough damage for what I need. But overall, both of these being 5.14 and then also 1.14, both of these are really good ways for setting up for the Tempest, and I've enjoyed them quite a lot. And they've been one of my ways of enjoying 5 directives without needing to go Headhunter, without needing to go OD or such. And they're quite enjoyable in that way. We'll likely as well, in a while, give these a build showcase. And lastly here, let's go on to a somewhat weirder one, Red Eclipse. I've had a Red Eclipse in my collection for forever, as a person that kind of calls themselves an Eclipse main. I feel I should. And the older version of this, and this has been an update to this, used to be with Elmo and Shocker Punch. And that was actually made all the way back when Hollywood was dependent on shock. And it worked actually really well for dealing with Hollywood. In the long past, before Project Resolve, I think was the big change to it, was that, for instance, now EMP will trigger the explosion. That wasn't the case in the past. You basically had to either shock the enemy or do some explosive damage to them. So mortars were really effective, but then actually that Shocker Punch with the Elmo with a shield as well, so we could melee for the shock, actually was a decent way to deal with Hollywood. But then, of course, Hollywood got changed, and nowadays we just run a Red Striker for that, and then just with a glass chest, and just run the specialization weapon for triggering it, or a jammer pulse with it. Because of that, the Red Eclipse didn't really have a purpose anymore. It was really just for Hollywood, and outside of that, you could make it make a little bit of sense. But I was like, you know what? We have other weapons ever since, and yeah, we had gotten, for instance, Iron Lung ever since. One of the ideas that I had, and one of the things I was kind of thinking of doing with it, was actually waiting for Tinkerer to come in. And I was really thinking we go with something like Future Perfect with a few yellow cores and maybe Technician, a few yellow cores, and then enough to, for instance, take a Future Perfect all the way to 6 tiers and overcharge with it. Then we could have a Fire Cam to go off of that. We could have a main talent of, for instance, Killer or Measured or something to help that happen. In the end, that was just, impractical. It just didn't work out. But I got another piece in that time as well, which was the Catalyst. In the end, I kind of went this route. We would just go Iron Lung and Catalyst. And actually, this one as well, if we take it into the game, actually the save for this, if we go and find it real quick, is in the same way as we showed before. It is actually saved with 5 pieces, and I even have the red chest for it. And of course, I have that Cheska Obliterate chest at the ready. But also what we can do is actually go with the Obliterate, or with the Eclipse chest instead of the Obliterate chest. And if we then, for instance, just take a Cheska piece on a different slot, which actually on this character is a holster, I'm pretty sure, we can also set it up like this and actually have a little bit more fire spread. And it's actually been an enjoyable build to play around with. It isn't as effective as just going Fire Eclipse. Not by a long shot. I could do, I could run rings around this thing just playing a Fire Eclipse. But just as a silliness, as a different way to kind of play the game, it is more than effective enough for just heroic play and such. It CCs quite a lot because of the Iron Lung. It will actually set things alight and then has enough damage to actually kill that thing as well. The Catalyst in here actually does get most of the bonuses going through it. So here we're actually making use of the weapon damage and the status effect. The thing that I was kind of in using it, for instance, in Ongoing Directive, the status effect wasn't per se being utilized that much because the bleed doesn't matter. But here with fire, it matters a little bit more. And I've been enjoying this one actually a lot, running around, and especially in kind of the layout that we had it a second ago, where we take an Obliterate chest here just to have a little bit more damage. The Obliterate does make a difference. Still a very weak build in comparison to any of the real damage dealers, but then alongside of it is of course doing some CC, and that CC is getting spread around. And actually because of the backpack, because of course with the backpack, this is effectively a glass on here as long as the enemy's on any fire, or well, any status effect, but then especially fire. As long as they are on fire, we get a pretty big bonus. Now, the uptime on that is really reliant on this, but then also if I shoot some weak point and such, because it is any status effect, of course, going up against hyenas and such, shooting the pouches on the rushers as they come out, and for instance and such, that will disorient a bunch of enemies, or shooting the backpacks on foamers, on immobilizers from True Sons. Being creative and trying to make this work is actually very enjoyable. And that's quite often also the case with some of the builds. Some of the builds are just there to have a different playstyle, and this is very much one of those. This, at its top, is not as high as Striker, but trying to get to that top is actually much harder than Striker. So because of that, it's kind of enjoyable to kind of rise to that challenge, try to get the most out of the build. And I have that quite often, and I have some builds that are also then good enough. I won't put this in the recommended list, for instance, but for some of the people that kind of enjoy some silliness, I can totally recommend making a Red Eclipse. And actually for some of the challenges and such as well, for instance, now with Reanimated, with setting some enemies on fire, I enjoy doing that with this build, for instance, even though I could have done it just as much with a Fire Eclipse. But one that did get some important changes to it, and actually finally a place kind of for the Catalyst where I feel that it kind of makes sense. Because in here, Coyote could make sense, Val could make sense, but actually the Catalyst in this one spot really fits in. And thus we come to the end of this build collection updates. As this one wasn't that many, there was a lot of Tinkerers actually, and even more build pictures where the Tinkerer went into the corner with some recommended talents around it. But overall, tipping skills came in. That did definitely get its own spot, well worth using. The Tempest changes, well worth thinking about. If you ran Pesti, Overdogs is kind of the way to go for it now. And even that red Eclipse, yeah, that if you were using it in the past or kind of are interested in some silliness, it's not a bad one. Outside of that, though, not many other builds did get changed, even though I've actually changed more builds than this, but just minor changes, sometimes in weapon types and such. We won't cover them per se here. Yeah, for instance, the brand set in the end that came in with this season, I didn't end up using that in the end. I can't really find a spot for it. But yeah, for instance, tipping skills that definitely come in. Shroud, actually, we didn't talk about it here, but that will make it onto some of the sniper builds as just another weapon. But Shroud, in this grand scheme of things, is just a weapon. I am kind of waiting to see if they maybe alter the Headhunter stacks on it. And for that, I'm leaving it a few patches before it actually makes it onto some build pictures. But yeah, dear oh dear, we have made it through another rambling talk about build collection updates, as yes, we had many of these, but I do enjoy actually each season coming to it and just, yeah, giving an update, getting to talk about some builds, kind of recapping as well some of the in-depth looks. That's usually what my changes are based on. I'll do a few in-depth looks into things, base some changes on to those, and then just, yeah, we'll implement those in the build collection. As a build collection, as always, is just an ever-growing and living thing, basically. As I make changes to builds in my game, I'll make them to the build collection. But yeah, that brings us to the end of this one. Thank you for joining me. If you did enjoy this video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out, so I'll do that a little bit of shilling here. For future videos, we're actually going to go into likely modifiers and a retaliation-only tips. Together with spooling up for another build showcase. And I think we're going to do it on the pistol headhunters, mostly because I should have done that years ago. But even though we've gotten the Tempest here, we'll leave that for a while later and tackle pistol headhunters. As a category, they're very popular, very useful, and I actually haven't tackled them much yet, mostly because I'm just not that great of a headhunter, but we'll make do. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. And as always, have a good night.